Welcome to lecture number 9. The Age of Jefferson will explore our nation's third president and events associated with his administration and the War of 1812. There are several important themes to be discussed in this presentation. The first includes a profile of Thomas Jefferson's outlook and his accomplishments. Secondly, the lecture will describe important events such as Marbury versus Madison and the Louisiana Purchase. Finally, the causes and consequences of American involvement in the War of 1812 will be discussed. As the leading figure of this era, it's fitting to begin this presentation with the profile of Thomas Jefferson. He was clearly a man of the Enlightenment. He could read Greek and Latin, and even designed his own mansion, Monticello. He loved to invent things, and popularized the item shown here, the polygraph, which made copies of his letters. On a personal level, he was actually quite shy. He was tall as he stood about 6 foot 2 inches in height, with flaming red hair, but he wasn't the greatest public speaker. He sent his State of the Union address to Congress rather than delivering it himself in a tradition which would last until Woodrow Wilson became president. He also surprised many visitors by wearing casual clothing and slippers. His career in public life was quite impressive. While a member of the Continental Congress, he became the primary author of the Declaration of Independence. He also served as governor of Virginia. He had a background in foreign affairs as he was an ambassador to France and Washington's Secretary of State. For 4 years, he also served as vice president under John Adams. However, he was also a man of many contradictions. Jefferson was an advocate of the common man, yet he lived in a lavish mansion, Monticello, and spent incredible amounts of money on frivolous items such as wine and a French cook. He wrote in the Declaration of Independence that all men were created equal, yet he owned numerous slaves. He advocated the government should have a limited set of powers, but he expanded the government's powers with the purchase of Louisiana. Finally, he wrote there should be no intermixture between the races, yet there is evidence he had a relationship with one of his slaves, Sally Hemings. Accusations concerning alleged relations with one of his slaves were part of the election of 1800, but were first published in 1802. Since then, historians showed Jefferson was present at Monticello 9 months before the birth of Hemings' children. Then, in the 1990s, DNA testing appeared to settle this question by proving that Jefferson had fathered at least one of Sally Hemings' children. Jefferson was a widower, and Hemings was his late wife's half-sister. Yet maybe this deed above all others demonstrates the true contradiction of Jefferson's words versus his actions. The election of 1800 proved to be one of the ugliest in American history, as there was a great deal of mudslinging back and forth between the Federalists and supporters of Jefferson. In 1799, President John Adams angered many in his party by seeking peace with France. This caused a rift in the Federalist Party. There wasn't much of an independent press, as supporters of Jefferson wrote that Adams supported a monarchy and wanted to attack individual liberties, while Jefferson was labeled an atheist and supporter of radicalism in France. In the end, this turned out to be a close election, but Adams was defeated. Thomas Jefferson was able to win the votes of the southern states, while his running mate, Aaron Burr, proved crucial in securing the votes from New York. Once again, problems developed with the Constitution and came into play. If the team of Jefferson and Burr won, Jefferson was supposed to serve as president, with Burr acting as vice president. However, as you can see from this map, Burr and Jefferson tied with 73 electoral votes each. This sent the election to the House of Representatives. In an ironic twist, because Federalists made up a majority in the House of Representatives, they would have the power to choose the next president. However, their choice was between Jefferson and Burr, each of whom were their enemies. They were initially deadlocked, but after several ballots, Thomas Jefferson was named the winner. Part of the reason why Jefferson won the presidency was due to the actions of Alexander Hamilton. While there was no love lost between he and Jefferson, Hamilton convinced some to support Jefferson, as Hamilton saw him as the lesser of two evils. Burr and Hamilton were bitter enemies. Later, in 1804, while still serving as vice president of the United States, Burr and Hamilton would fight in a duel. Hamilton died, while Burr's political career was destroyed. For more information about this famous duel, click on the hyperlink below. To avoid another controversy in future presidential elections, the 12th Amendment was passed. This called for presidential electors to cast separate ballots for president and vice president. Possibly the most important result of this election was the fact that after a very controversial campaign, there was a peaceful transfer of power from one political party to another. It demonstrated this American experiment in democracy was working. Once in office, Jefferson hoped to establish his own set of policies, but one of the first items he had to deal with concerned the court system. Near the end of Adams' presidency, he named several Federalists to positions within the judicial branch in hopes that his party could continue to control at least one branch in the government. Taken together, these were labeled the Midnight Appointments. This was controversial, but a legal question developed involving one such appointee. His name was William Marbury. William Marbury was set to become a justice of the peace for Washington, D.C. However, he never received the commission granting him this appointment. James Madison, whose responsibility it was to deliver such appointments, as he was Jefferson's new Secretary of State, refused to deliver the documentation. Marbury sued Madison on the grounds that the Judiciary Act of 1789 allowed the Supreme Court to issue rulings requiring the delivery of such paperwork. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court was John Marshall, another of Adams' midnight appointees. Ironically, he was supposed to have delivered the letter to Marbury, but had failed to do so. He was also a distant cousin of Thomas Jefferson. He was put in a difficult position. If he ruled in Marbury's favor and granted him his position, Jefferson would surely ignore the ruling, thereby regulating the Supreme Court to a position of irrelevance compared to the other branches. In 1803, Justice Marshall issued his famous decision in the case Marbury v. Madison. He argued that ethically, Madison should deliver the commission. However, the courts could not require him to do so. They couldn't require its delivery because the Constitution never gave the courts the power to issue such rulings. The section of the Judiciary Act empowering the courts to make such judgments was unconstitutional. In the short run, Marshall's ruling denied the courts the minor power to force the delivery of legal paperwork, such as the appointments. However, in the long run, it established the very important power of judicial review. This is the power of our courts to review the constitutionality of laws passed by Congress. This was incredibly important for the history of the nation, as it put the Supreme Court on equal footing with the other three branches of government at the national level. In 1800, officials in the United States began to hear rumors that France had regained control of the Louisiana Territory. This set into motion a series of events which eventually resulted in the purchase of Louisiana. By 1802, it was clear the French had regained control. This was confirmed when restrictions were placed on American access to the port of New Orleans. If you remember, Pinckney's treaty had secured America's right to the free access of New Orleans. If American access to New Orleans was cut off permanently, it would deliver a serious blow to farmers living in the West and South who shipped their goods down the Mississippi. Prior to the French and Indian War, French holdings in North America encompassed all of the Louisiana Territory. Having Spain control this vast empire was one thing. They were a declining power. Once the French regained possession, Jefferson was worried. France was on the rise, with Napoleon at the nation's helm. Jefferson felt he must act quickly. So in early 1803, he authorized the American minister in France, Robert Livingston, to spend up to $2 million to purchase the port city of New Orleans and as much surrounding territory as possible. Livingston was shocked when the French offered to sell all of Louisiana. In what would not be the final time a bureaucrat would spend more money than he was authorized to spend, Livingston agreed to purchase the Louisiana Territory for $15 million. This just about doubled the size of the United States. $15 million was an enormous sum of money at the time, yet it's estimated this land deal cost the United States about 3 cents an acre.